This afternoon we're going to deal with part 2, which is moving from response to recovery, and this is on pages 21 to 23 of the report, plus parts 1 to 4 of Appendix 1. So we'll start with sections 12 and 13 of the report and parts 1 to 3 of the appendix, and this will be introduced by Drew Powell, and it'll be followed by questions and answers and comments. After that we'll then move on to section 14 of the report and part 4 of the appendix, and you'll note that in this section there are various themes, and each theme will be introduced by the lead officer for that relevant theme, with members' views being sought on each. It is then proposed that the views of the meeting on each of the themes, both where there is a consensus of opinion and where there is not, will be included as an appendix to the follow-up report when it is considered by the executive at its meeting on the 18th of October. So if we could start with Drew dealing with sections 12 and 13 of the report, and following his introduction I'll open it up for questions and then comments. Over to you, Drew.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Okay, so part 12, just a couple of highlights from there. I think one of the key issues with this is that the difference between this and a normal response. Usually we have a response to a major incident or an emergency, which is something like a fire or flood. The blue lights led by the police will deal with that incident. We will be a support organisation, and when it's finished, the water's gone away, the fire's out, the recovery phase is passed on to the local authority, which would usually be the county council. Excuse me. The difference here clearly is that we do not know how long that response phase is going to be, and where response and recovery cross over, and how we plan for that. But this pandemic does point towards an extended response phase. I think what has changed since the report was written has been the speed of some of the relaxation of the restrictions, probably quicker than we expected. And as a result of that, we've had to sort of move resources quite quickly to deal with urgent recovery, the opening of the toilets, the car parks, and now looking at town centres. So there's a double pressure, I think, on officers and members to be looking at both at the same time. What we do know is that we will emerge into a very different economic climate and landscape, and that we need to plan for that, and we need to have a strategic approach. The other key thing is, the corporate strategy that the council adopted in May 2018 was fit for purpose for the community we served at that time. We may well be serving a very different community in a very different financial and economic position, and so there's a good chance that this renewal and recovery plan will work towards potentially realigning the council's priorities and objectives in the future. Now, the timescale for that cannot be agreed or even thought about at this stage, but it's worth thinking about that. And as a result, the plan needs to be dynamic and flexible, and it will develop and change over time. So moving into 13, in terms of strategic framework for recovery and renewal, what would help, Carol, if you could hold up the part 1 of the appendix, please. So if members can see that, this is just really a thinking piece. So how do we start to actually work out what we need to look at? And so what we've tried to do here is look at the plan in terms of, notionally, the operational internal activities and the strategic external elements of that. So looking from the top there, the plan will have 2 elements to it at this stage in terms of our thinking. It will be informed by the strategic objectives of the council as they are now, but also what will they be in the future? Will we be looking to constrict and survive, or are we looking to expand and invest and develop? Probably a combination of everything, but again, not clear at this stage. But on the left-hand side, sort of generally in blue, but there's a big crossover in these areas, so bear that in mind. Service recovery, we're doing that already. We're bringing services back online. We've changed the way we operate some of the services, all within budget and within normal operational activity. If you look at the governance side of things, clearly we've got a meeting today, a remote meeting. So how do we learn from agile governance? Financially, we need to recover immediately, and we need to look at long-term sustainability. And then as you move over to the right-hand side of the diagram, the strategic part is more around, community and business and the interaction, partners, residents, local economy, enabling support. And a really important part of this sort of visual is the bottom part, which is this isn't just members and officers. We need to lever in that external expertise from the partners, the people who've responded so well in the community, the people who've responded so well in business, plus partners in terms of county council, regional government and so on, to make sure that we're bringing everything together and we recover and we renew together, because that's the way this will have to operate. So those timescales and those plans need to align and not contradict each other. If you could move to the next slide, please, Darryl. Okay, so on this side of it, so what we've tried to do here is reflect. So this diagram serves two purposes. One is to allow officers to do the operational recovery. So this reflects the way that we set up the response phase. So if you look at the bottom right-hand side of the diagram, we've got the response team still escalating issues in to what is now the recovery management team, the officer team, who meet weekly to deal with these recovery elements, the toilets, the town centres, which is operational activity. They then escalate up to the various cells that have been identified here, or the themes which emerge from the previous plan and reflect the challenges that have come forward from the pandemic. So for officers, this enables us to operate on a daily basis. From the point of view of moving forward as a vehicle to develop a plan, the proposal is to have an exec member leading on each of these themes. As you can see is detailed there. So you've got the name of an ELT member who will be outlining what's within each of these themes a little bit later on. You've got an SLT lead, and then you've got a member of the exec who would be part of the development of that work stream. Within that box, you've also got the existing 6 corporate themes, and clearly things like the climate change and biodiversity declaration would all feed into the thought process and the discussions that will go on. And again, all 7 of those areas cross-cut. They're not isolated, and what will be impacting on residents will clearly be impacting on community and partnership businesses and the like. That then works with the senior leadership team via the executive through to normal council governance and decision making. So that gives you a visual about how we might want to develop the plan going forward. Okay, if you can move on to the next slide, please, Darryl. So other members can read that clearly, but that's obviously within the papers. And this is to enable us to sort of scope what we're trying to achieve. We've come up with some draft recovery and renewal objectives to enable us to understand, what are we trying to achieve through this process. And these, I think, will be fluid. I think they will need to change, but just outlining the 4 key ones at the top. Clearly, we need to ensure that delivery of services that are focused to meet the needs of customers, community and businesses are restored where appropriate. So that's getting us back on our feet, as soon as we can. Then clearly immediate and longer term financial sustainability is paramount. Members are engaged with decision making in an appropriate way through local democratic governance, which I know is a key issue for members, and that we follow the principle of build back better. And the opportunities to learn and become more efficient and effective are realised wherever possible. So if we broadly follow those 4 key objectives, we will enable that'll enable us to sort of underwrite the plan as it moves forward. There's a range of supplementary objectives underneath there, which, cherry picking a few, you can see the one about the existing 6 corporate themes, and also climate change and biodiversity, and the need for coordinated strategic communications with our partners as we move forward. So that gives you, hopefully, members, an outline as to the structure around which we might want to move forward. And that takes us on to section 14 about how we can engage now in thinking through how this will work. Chair, do you want me to move straight into that, or would you like to look at the questions that have come in already?
No, can we deal with items 12 and 13 and parts 1 to 3, parts 1, 2 and 3 of appendix, and then once we've dealt with that, we'll then move on to item 14. So if I can invite questions in respect of items 13, 14 of the papers, together with parts 1, 2 and 3 of Appendix 1. Councillor Mackay.
It is just a comment. I mean, as I commented to Councillor Rose yesterday, that this term Build Back Better, I'm not sure whether other members are aware that it has quite a pedigree and has been used by NGOs and other people in disaster recovery situations, and it has a well-defined meaning, which is an approach to post-disaster recovery that reduces vulnerability to future disasters and builds community resilience to address physical, social, environmental and economic vulnerabilities and shocks. So it's very encouraging to see that officers are using this term, because it clearly has a pedigree, and it says something about their professionalism and knowledge, I do think, and it's very encouraging to know that this approach has been taken.
Thank you. Darryl, can you put on the screen Appendix 1, Part 1, please? And then, yes, could I invite members to either to comment on this or to raise any questions concerning this chart? No? Are we all happy with it?
Can't see it.
Well, it's in the papers. It's in the papers in the papers that were issued last week.
Page.
Right, Darryl, can we move over then to Appendix 1, Part 2? The draft recovery.
Sorry, John. Sorry, I was just scrabbling to change. If I have actually I've got one question.
All right, can we go back? Yes, okay, Councillor Rose.
Thank you. So at the bottom here we have lever and external expertise from partners to support members and officers. Could you just define partners for me, just in the context being that there is a huge amount of expertise from a number of different organisations, many of whom have been taking a really active role in helping communities to come together in this particular COVID instance, but who have also been building community resilience over a long period of time previous to this. So I'm just wondering, when it's saying lever and external expertise from partners, is that, how limiting is that? How inclusive is that to the expertise that can be found locally? And I'm not talking about just from concerned residents, but I mean organisations who are kind of specialising in resilience. Thank you.
Drew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rose. I think at this stage we wouldn't be looking to rule anyone in or rule anyone out. I think it's a question of working with the people who've been effective during the response phase, who can add expertise to the discussion. We haven't, decided how we're going to do that engagement yet. That'll be, that will come pending approval by executive to move forward with the development of this plan. But I think we would want to be talking to all the people who we can work with to achieve the best outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to just briefly comment on the proposed areas for development, please, particularly regarding business. One of the top point there is tourism, and the question is, do we play a more active role? Now, I know that there are many existing, tourist information points across the South Hams and Devon, with the likes of Visit South Devon, and there's visit points in Kingsbridge and places like that. But I don't wish for the council to be duplicating any of that. But I do think in the next few years, when in particular a lot of people in this country are likely to want to holiday in this country, because they possibly won't want to go abroad, I do think that's an area that perhaps the South Hams and the council can work on to support local businesses, because by God, they're going to need it, and to capitalise on it, to be honest. So I'd be very keen on supporting tourism where we can. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, I think we're going to deal with that in more detail when we come to deal with Part 4.
Okay, thanks.
Right, on the Part 1, the draft recovery and renewal framework, if there are not any more questions, then perhaps we could move on to part 2, which is the of Appendix 1. Is there any comments, questions on this? No. And then perhaps we could move on to part 3, the draft recovery and renewal objectives. Oh, sorry. I see Councillor Hodgson, you wish to speak.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I was a bit slow typing in there. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure where the JLP review would come into this. I know it's like perhaps a little bit down the line, but I think being as we're going to be moving into quite a different space, I just wonder, I think that's quite a critical piece of work that, sort of like we work with. And I just wonder if there's kind of somewhere on the horizon, a kind of a timeline that would include.
Thank you. Drew, can you answer that, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. I think at this stage, and the Joint Local Plan Review has a timetable that's set out at the moment. I think we would have to determine whether the emerging work from this recovery plan would require a change to the Joint Local Plan. And obviously it's something we'd have to do in conjunction with other partners. So I think while this plan sets out these areas for consideration and development, they will need to link to the wider elements of the council's work as we move forward. But at this stage, I don't think we would be preempting when any review of the JLP would take place based on the current situation. As I say, it's a gathering of ideas to develop a plan, which will take a period of time.
Councillor Hodgson, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, just very quickly, just to say that, I mean, it's more about what started the Joint Local Plan was like the ONS. And I just think there might, it'd be really useful to understand whether there's acknowledge that there may be changes in the demand, and that, so that could actually sort of be quite useful piece of information of understanding whether we need to go through a review or what stage. And I think that might be just a useful kind of exercise that possibly wouldn't be such a, so long-winded, but it just could give us an indication about how the JLP stands.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the diagram that's in front of us, Recovery, Renewal, Council Governance, Decision Making, which is the same ones you've got on the screen there. And it does say it's got executive, senior leadership team, then the boxes, and it's got an executive member in each box. But where will the members come in? Where will they be involved, please?
I think it's right at the top, Council Governance and Decision Making. That's correct, isn't it, Drew?
Yes, I think also that the exec members working on each of these themes will be looking to, gather information from the wider membership as to how we move forward on those particular areas. And also, clearly today, the members are going to be given every opportunity to identify the key areas for them, what priority they should be given, and how we should move them forward in the latter part of the meeting.
Fine, and well, each of those boxes is actually very important, but I know that sometimes members feel as though they're sidelined and don't always have the input that perhaps they would like to have. So I would like to make sure that members do get consulted and do have an input into each and every section to which they've got a particular interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Shall we move on to part 3, the draft recovery and renewal objectives? Darryl, if you could put that on the screen, please. Right, I have, thank you. I have Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. I wanted to get in there quickly before anyone else did. Can I just ask a couple of things? And I'm not sure the extent to which there are answers, but on key point, the bullet point 1, it talks about delivery of service focus to meet the needs of customers. Absolutely and totally in favour of that. But do we have any indication at this early stage what that might look like? And to pick up Councillor Rowe's point just now about including member consultation. And then under bullet point 7 and the second group of bullet points, it says ensure that changes to the way we work and services we deliver will take into consideration the welfare and well-being of staff and of course members as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, do we know what services focused on the needs of customers look like at this stage? I don't think we do. I think we don't know exactly what the community is going to look like at the end of this. It's all about the duration of the time. I think we have an expectation there'll be increase in people who are vulnerable financially and fuel poverty and a number of different factors. So I think we need to be led by the evidence. And that's something we'll be working with partners to gather, and obviously with members who've got an understanding of what's going on in their community. So I think it'd be preemptive to shape our services now when we don't know what is needed. So that's the objective, to work towards that, but we will need to have the evidence and make sure that we focus our services correctly. So that is clearly a key part of this plan going forward. On the second part of it regarding staff and members, I think we've all been subject to a huge change in the way we operate. Today's meeting is an example of that. And there are some very real impacts of operating in a very different way. Now, if we were to continue this method of operation, working from home on a 100% basis, then there are some knock-on effects in terms of people's welfare and so on. And we need to make sure that we are cognitive of those as we make decisions towards accommodation strategies, ways of working, governance arrangements, and so on. So I think it's important that runs all the way through this recovery and renewal plan.
Thank you.
Can I come back?
Yes, certainly. Yes, please do.
I have no objections to number 7 about the well-being of staff, and I hope I didn't imply anything else, but I was just suggesting that it's not just the well-being of staff, it's the well-being of everybody, including members.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Are there any other comments on this document, part 3 of Appendix 1? If not, we'll move on to Councillor Rose.
Just to say, I just think this is really, really heartening and inspiring to see the level of care and kind of inspiration demonstrated in this page. So I'd just like to say a really massive thank you to any of the officers who put this together, or the senior leadership team, or whoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, if there are no more questions or comments, we'll move on to item 14, the proposed way forward. And you'll need to turn to part 4 of Appendix 1, which hopefully will shortly be on the screen. You'll see that this is broken down into various themes and subjects. Each theme will be led by an officer for the purposes of this meeting. So the residents will be led by Izzy Blake, business by Chris Brook, community and partnership by Neil Hawke plus Izzy Blake, financial stability Lisa Buckle, communications Leslie Crocker, governance Catherine Bowen, and service recovery Sarah Moody. So we'll start with residents. So Izzy, would you like to introduce this and encourage members to come forth, as they say?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, we have got a series of advanced questions as well.
Yes, I'll deal with that after Izzy has given her introduction.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. This pandemic has afforded us a real opportunity, both in the actions of the community group and the information sharing across the NHS and local authorities, to really get to the heart of supporting our most vulnerable quickly and with the very basic of needs. What we are in no doubt about is the needs of our most vulnerable will last long after these restrictions are lifted, and the need to support the shielded cohort, many of whom were vulnerable just to the very worst effects of COVID-19 rather than for any other reason, will fade, only to be replaced by those who are economically vulnerable or, as a result of the lockdown, face issues with their health and well-being. The Council may wish, as part of its recovery plan, to consider the learning from the work undertaken by our community response team and look at how we will continue to best support our most vulnerable, who have little or no voice, and wherever possible, mitigate some of the worst effects of this crisis on our most disadvantaged residents. Work under this theme will need to be informed by a robust evidence base. What's been clear throughout this pandemic is no single organisation, be it NHS, local government or the DWP, has a complete picture of our citizens. We will need to find ways to share information in the future. Issues around mental health, domestic violence and financial hardship will be a reality for many of our residents. Members will be keen to address wherever possible these issues. There are no doubt tough times ahead for our people. The Council, as part of our Build Back Better ethos, can, as part of this work stream, think about how we best support our economically vulnerable to ensure that losses of jobs do not mean that people leave the area and that the South Hams very much remains open for business. At the heart of this work will be the need to involve and consult with residents, and what has become apparent is that whilst for many people the council should act as a silent service, collecting waste and council tax seamlessly and efficiently, there are many other people that need us, and for any future service design we will need to continue to consider this. Any
Right.
questions?
Thank you, Izzy. Right. Can I just remind members that it's important that if you have an input into this and you have a comment or view, that you make that clear and concise so that when it does go into the appendix, then it is clear for all to understand. So long and rambling remarks will make it difficult for Darryl to record. So all comments and views need to be clear and concise. We already have two advanced questions. The first from Councillor Pannell, and that's on the screen. Councillor Pannell, do you want to add to the question or comment on the question at all?
I'll only very briefly say I recognise there are other sections of the population as well as young people and children, the elderly, for example, some of a category which some of us are approaching. But yes, I think it just needs to be taken into consideration when this is considered.
Thank you. We have, Izzy, would you like to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. We recognise the stress and pressures that young people have been under during lockdown and with the disruption to their schools and social lives. We proactively made contact with the designated safeguarding leads of all secondary schools to understand some of the issues they are facing when ringing home, and we've allocated funding for them to spend in emergencies for families facing extreme hardship. We are keen to keep this line of communication and continue to support our schools as they support families. We're likely to see an increase in youth homelessness and will continue to work with Young Devon on our schools education programme and do our utmost to find suitable options for young people requiring our services.
Thank you. Councillor Pannell, and would you like to feed into the appendix a clear and concise point to be included arising out of your question?
Yeah, perhaps I can discuss it with Izzy and put something through.
Can you do that during the meeting, please?
Oh, do you want it done now?
Yes, please.
Oh, right. Okay, I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thank you. So the next advanced question is from Councillor Sweet. Councillor Sweet, do you want to add to the question that's on the screen?
Hi, thank you. I was aware before the lockdown that there was a considerable amount of money released from central government for rough sleepers. Then sort of during the lockdown, there's been a little bit of discrepancy between funding that was available for COVID measures, and then it seemed like it was retracted. So I'm not totally clear on what funding is currently available moving forward. I mean, the housing and the street navigator team have done a fantastic proactive response sort of through the beginning of COVID to house some of our really vulnerable. But I'm aware of, a new group of vulnerable people that, are sleeping out in tents by the river. So I'm wondering how we can, really kind of move forward all this amazing work and make sure that we've got some kind of like stepping stone block. And I'm aware that HMOs have worked quite well. We've got one in Totnes and I think the other one's in Ivybridge. And, I think this is a time to really look at converting another one of our properties to help these vulnerable who, have already made a kind of stepping stone into changing their lifestyle. So that would, yeah,
Okay,
I'd like something like that.
Izzy, would you like to respond?
Yes, the government made available to local authorities such as us who had done quite dramatic reductions to their rough sleep account, awarded us £1,600 per council at the beginning of the crisis, which was aimed to deal with the increase in accommodating rough sleepers. Obviously, it doesn't go very far, but we did have the £220,000, which was part of a bid with Team Bridge and pays for our outreach workers, and we've still got that. That runs for another year. We're looking at ways we can flex that funding. We've agreed 4 units of accommodation for Housing First with one of our local registered providers. We currently have 7 rough sleepers accommodated as our response to the COVID. That's out of a total of 10 households we've got in temporary accommodation at the moment. 7 of them are rough sleepers, and yeah, we are exploring options about HMO arrangements. The difficulty is, of course, that Totnes, the local housing allowance, it means that accommodation is very expensive and not usually in line with what we're able to afford. So we will need to look at what we might be able to do in the future. But very encouraged to have those 4 units of accommodation for Housing First offered by a registered provider.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweet, if you could put something clear and concise together to feed into the document that I mentioned, that would be helpful. I've got Councillor Hodson.
My question has been answered, thank you. It was about young people, and I've heard what I needed to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Callaghan.
Thanks very much. Yeah, a lot of people are struggling with council tax, I imagine, at the moment, and will be in the future. It's a priority debt, and the council's able to use bailiffs, as I understand it. What's happening with this practice of using bailiffs? Is this going to be changed in the current crisis, please?
Izzy, would you like to respond?
Yes, as so far we have not done our usual reminder run for people who have not yet made a payment towards their council tax or are in arrears with that. We will do the first of that. We're aiming to do that on the 22nd of June. We will start sending reminders. Now, this is 2-part. This is lots of people don't pay until they get a reminder still. And the other thing is we want to be proactive. We want to give people options around how we might be able to help. So there will be some information with that reminder to say, look, we know you're late, we know times are hard, come and talk to us. We can put you in touch with our money advice service, we can work out a repayment plan. So we're being really proactive and supporting our residents manage their finances as best they can in the current situation. With regards bailiffs, we use bailiffs as an absolute last resort. If people have negotiated repayments with us and we've worked those down and they are keeping to those terms, then that's fine. It's when there is no other option. We are not a bailiff happy council, but we will use them when required.
Thank you.
So can I just to follow up? So you will continue to theoretically be using. You haven't changed that. You're not going to change it.
We haven't since the outbreak of COVID. We have not been using bailiffs. There have been no visits to properties, and we will keep that under revision. But yes, at the moment we will, in the extreme circumstances, use a bailiff. But that really is last resort.
Can I just remind members that we're talking about proposed areas for development. In other words, we're talking about the future of the council rather than current issues. So can we bear that in mind when asking questions? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make the point really that as well as in the present, we belong to the Community Safety Partnership, and we have our safeguarding officer, Louisa Daly, who is not only up with the present situation, but obviously looking to the future with regard to protecting young people and looking after their interests. I'd also like to make the point that with regard to accommodation for rough sleepers, I think it's high time that we as a council looked at maybe building ourselves some single person accommodation that could be extremely efficient, probably more efficient than having houses of multiple occupation, in as much as they could be bed sits, they could have all the facilities someone needs in an extremely efficient and compact space, and they could be built to modern specifications, so they wouldn't have to spend much on heating or maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you. Izzy, do you want to comment on that, or shall I move on to the next question?
Just quickly, Chair, it's something that we absolutely we consider all the time. We're having some conversations as a previous report that Chris Brooke brought to ONS around housing companies. So some of these things might be easier to do in the future than they currently are. But absolutely, it's something that we would like to consider.
Thank you, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to remind members that whilst we're looking at a recovery plan, we are also at the moment facing a real question about financial viability and the sort of financial crisis that the council is facing right now. And from my perspective, if I was looking at it, we are going to be needing to be looking at cutbacks. So whilst we're looking at a recovery process, we have to be realistic about the fact that given the financial situation the council is in at the moment, the likelihood is we're going to be facing an issue over our own cutback process rather than looking to see how much money we could spend. My concern is that I don't want the council to develop into a higher taxation council, because I think the last thing that the people who live in the South Hams need at the moment is a hike in taxes. I think coming out of this kind of environment that they're in, people will actually require more disposable income and less taxation. So I would hate to think that the council started to get carried away with high levels of expenditure, which was going to have to be funded either by increasing taxing or looking at our reserve situation in the future and looking at the reserves that we've got and how we are going to spend those as well. And the idea that we don't touch the reserves is another issue that councillors need to be aware of when they're looking at increasing expenditure to help assist people in recovery.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Can I say that there is a theme, financial stability, that's coming up shortly, so I'm sure those issues will be considered in that section. I've got no other request to speak. Izzy, in your proposed areas for development, you ask several questions. First of all, dealing with increase in vulnerable population, you ask the question, how do we identify and support them? Then under the matter of engagement, you say, how do we ensure that we involve our residents? Would you like to perhaps give a steer to members as to what your thoughts are on this? And then perhaps we could invite comments from members on the questions that you raise.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. With regards to, I think Drew has alluded to that there's so many unknowns still around this. But one of the things that we feel quite sure about is that there will be an increase in mental health issues, that there will certainly be some job losses and people who are financially vulnerable. So around identifying them, we've already started to ask some of our community groups for some of the data that they've got so that we can unpack that a bit more. Certainly some of the work that the CBS has been doing is around talking to food banks and about how many people are using those. So we need to get smart about the evidence that we've got, and I think as I said earlier, what's been really clear is nobody has that overall picture. It's why some of those issues with the shielded cohort were a bit sort of haphazard at first about trying to organise a response, because there is no single view. So we need to be quite robust with what evidence that we've got.
Okay, and then perhaps could you deal with how do we ensure that we involve our residents?
Yes, I mean, I think that there is we as a council we take our complaints very seriously. We deal with them. There is a channel in which we deal with that. But I'm not so sure that we take so much notice of our compliments, which obviously usually mean that there are more of an effort to actually do for somebody to pay us a compliment. They're usually doing it without without expecting anything back, and I think there's some real learning in there with our residents. We do need to get out and about. We need to maybe look at and I know Sarah will be talking about this later, about changes to the way that we use our localities officers, so that we really are out and about, and we involve our residents, and we take forward that kind of goodwill that we've really improved upon with our response to some of this some of the crisis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got Councillor Panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, you asked me to come up with a succinct wording. I just wondered if we could put in under the residents on the first bullet point, how do we identify and support them, adding in something like especially which sections of the population have been particularly affected, such as children, young people, the elderly and disabled.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on what Izzy said, really, I've got 2 points. The first is sort of one of the principles, which is, we're often accused of it being an officer-led in terms of policy development, and really what these questions are there for is to stimulate member debates in terms of what members think we should be doing, so that it isn't seen as officers just coming back with a set of, this is what we're going to do as a council for members. And I guess it's probably, that's quite a bit to take in when you think that actually we're in a completely different situation than we've been in for forever. And we do need to everybody needs to get into that space. Well, what does that mean? So it's not just about us coming up with the solutions, it's about you guys giving us some direction on where you think those solutions should be put in place. And the second point I wanted to make, and it's a really good example about what Izzy said about the data. If you take the business grants, so we had a very, very small team, about half a person, that would administer business rates, and a lot of those business rate customers were they had business rate relief, so we didn't have any contact with them. We've now, as a result of this grant process, had more contact with businesses as a whole in the South Hams than we've had in years, and that's an example of how we need to use that information and start looking at what we can do with it so that we can support businesses going forward. And it's the same thing with residents. We know we're going to get more people who are going to be struggling financially and potentially mentally. And so we need to work out how we can help them. But actually, what we really need is member steers on this.
Okay.
That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brazil.
Yes, thank you, John, and pleased to hear those words from Steve about member steer on it. Can I just say that when you talked about the NHS or the DWP or central government or whoever, you know, from what this has learned is it's a bottom up approach, that the communities knew who the vulnerable people were way ahead of any of those other institutions, or they certainly knew who needed help, and of course they were already helping them. And secondly, I thought it was quite instructive that in Izzy's presentation, talking about how do we engage the residents and things like that, didn't mention members once. Just all it was about how our locality officers, you know, knew we needed to get them out more into the community, and I think that's instructive. It tells, you know, that I don't think within the South Hams that there is a good understanding of officers of the role of members and the role of members within their communities, because you can rest assured that I would think the vast majority of local councillors know their communities incredibly well, and I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't use it we don't use the expertise and knowledge that they have. For example, and Steve mentioned it there, local businesses. I'm sure as a local member, we would really want to know the kind of contact that you as a council had with these business rates payer or the small business rates payers, because we're the sort of people that will see them on a daily or weekly or even monthly basis, but we will definitely see them face to face. And you know, there has to be a two-way process here. We as members want to know the information that you've got, and you as a council should be interested in the information that we've got as members. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay. Steve, you wanted to reply.
Well, thank you, Councillor Brazil, for taking up my challenge. That's exactly the sort of stuff we want to hear, and I'm sure Darryl will get that into the minutes. The other point is that you mentioned about central government and top down, and it needs to be bottom up. I think central government is starting to realise that, and I know I've been on calls now around the development of local outbreak plans, where they're seeing that they're giving the control out of the centre and pushing it down to sort of local authority level. Admittedly, some of it's upper tier, but the upper tier are working closely with us. So I think what you'll start to see is the realisation from central government that they actually can't do it all. And I think that they're starting to learn that. So that's my only comment there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. This is my microphone from the actual screen. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So I won't say too much because I've actually got a piece that's going to come up in the community and partnership section, although of course as residents in community and partnership are so intrinsically linked, I'll just say a little bit now and then I'll take that off what I'll say later. So the piece that I'm kind of like I want to bring into this is really about well, it's kind of ready. It's very much harnessing what is already there. So, you know, so how do we identify what's going on in the community? Well, it's like, what we really need to be identifying is what are the structures, networks, organizations, charities, volunteer groups, what are the structures that the communities have generated themselves that are already doing the work that we're needing to be stepping into doing a lot more of. Obviously, councils are going to be and have already been, you know, playing a part in building community resilience and trying to support communities. But from what I've seen previously, councils have been operating much more on this kind of top-down hierarchical system of, you know, services mainly, whereas now there seems to be this kind of surgence towards resilience. But there are people who have been doing this for decades. So how do we identify, you know, the financial, physical, mental, vulnerable people? Is we need to ask the communities and find out who in the communities is dealing with these people. How do we ensure that we involve residents? Is we need to be finding out which organizations have come up out of the residents themselves in order to address these issues. So we need to be meeting the communities halfway. And I think if we're coming in with this attitude of like, right, we the council are going to kind of take a leadership role even, we could be missing a trick, because actually the communities themselves have already taken that role, and actually we need to meet them halfway. And also this approach, you know, exactly as Councillor Austin said, it's like we don't have money to spend right now, but actually we don't need to. I mean, of course there's officer time and there's a bit of resources and whatever, but you know, if we're meeting the people who are already doing this work for us, then we're not needing to invest large amounts of money. I think that it's about the angle of approach, and I can see that written all the way through this document, but I think the kind of the difficulty is translating these good intentions into policy. Yeah, I guess it's just what the piece I'm trying to bring is about meeting them halfway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Hi, I just wanted to say that I think we've got amazing natural resources in the South Hams, and also I was quite heartened when Steve said that, and Julian, about, you know, working with from the bottom up, because I know that Kingsbridge Town Council have been great, and their gardening involves lots of people in the community, and I think building on that kind of stuff, because the comments I've heard from people that have been through lockdown, you know, they haven't all been negative, and that people have actually got to know people in their communities for the first time. They've had the time to do it. So I think there can be lots of positives that are going to come out of this. And I think, you know, people have actually sort of been commenting on things that have come out of it, meeting people. Okay. And I think we should engage with that, really.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, can we move on to business? And could I ask Chris Brook to introduce this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and thank you, members. I think this is just a food for thought list. That's all it was intended to be. And just building on some of the comments we've had in the early debate, I think there'll be an opportunity to engage with the business, sell or conversation, however you want to think of it, following on from this. And really, this was just an idea to start getting your ideas together. I've just posed some questions. I think we should set the framework probably first, and that is to say that there's always a tension with businesses. So a really excellent example of that is I've had 16 emails since this morning saying, let's get businesses open on Dartmouth Embankment. And I've had one email saying, I live at Bayards Cove, and everybody that's using the takeaways and eating outside is dumping rubbish all over Bayards Cove, and it's appalling, and what's the council going to do about it? And I'm going to sue you if you don't do anything. So whatever we do, we will hopefully make a big difference to lots of businesses and lots of people, but we will always invariably have some people that think what we've done isn't appropriate. So this is where member engagement is so important, because the local members will probably bear the brunt of that tension. So anything we do, we've got to do it together. That's my first message. And I think we really need to rethink you know, what means the most to us in terms of our economy. And tourism is a huge sector. And in the past, we really have let tourism do its thing. And that's fine in the past. And I think now we just need to ask ourselves the question, do we need to support tourism more? And how do we best do that in the context of the skill sets we have and the financial constraints we have? And obviously those organisations exist, and we need to communicate with Devon and the wider Southwest to make sure that we get the biggest bang for our buck in whichever way we can. And I also think that there's likely to be a change to skills and training and a requirement for some, because I believe there's a significant amount of self-employed people in the South Hams and in the Southwest, mainly because there aren't the sort of same levels of industry as there are in other parts of the country. So people aspire to live here, and in order to get a job here, they've basically got to make it happen themselves. So lots of entrepreneurs and lots of people that may need to become entrepreneurs as a result of losing whatever job they did have. And there are opportunities to boost skills and training that we can either fund directly or through partnerships. We can use some of our existing resources in terms of some of our space that we own to run workshops and skills training. So there's lots of options we can do there, but you know, that's for members to start thinking about. There's the open space question, so I'll allude to that into my introduction with how do we best get businesses to use that. What is appropriate when it comes to that use? And everyone will have a different view. And then there's the town centres question, which is, you know, what is the new normal? You know, we're getting feedback from community groups that they've been instrumental in really supporting their communities through all of this, which has been fantastic. But what they don't want to be doing is putting a yellow jacket on and standing on Totnes High Street, making sure everyone stands 2 metres apart. They don't feel that's appropriate. So what is appropriate? Where does that community role end and where does ours start? Or is it more of a local issue? Are we a facilitator? These are the questions we've got to ask ourselves. And I think the active travel kind of comes into that. There may be some business opportunities, but it's certainly part of the scene of and the fabric of our community, the district and our towns. So there may be opportunities to bid for money there, or at the very least to promote schemes that we know through existing channels. So through the JLP, through Devon as the main authority when it comes to travel. So that's probably enough for me, Chairman. But I just wanted to express that it's really, if there are things not on there, don't think that they can't be on there. This was just a thought exercise to get the members into that discussion.
Thank you, thank you. I've got a comment from Councillor Smurden. Darryl, can you put that on the screen, please? If you're Councillor Smurden, do you want to say anything further on this, or shall I ask Mr. Brooke to respond?
No, I don't. That's fairly self-explanatory, and there's been discussion around this already today, and I'm sure that there will be, going forward. Councillor Austin has made the point that we're really going to be struggling for money, and I think we need to be very careful not to set hairs running. That we're going to be sort of dispensing largesse when it comes to tourism. Yes, by all means, we need to be consulting and we need to be enabling where we can, but I would just urge caution when it comes to that. But it's self-explanatory, and if other members have got views, then I'm happy to hear them.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to comment at all?
Only that it was interesting that when all of this happened and we wanted to lobby our MPs around the real jeopardy that Devon was in as a result of the tourist trade collapsing, as a result of us not feeding into the latest surveys on tourism, and we haven't done for the past several years, we didn't have any data on the tourist trade in South Devon. So although that was then and this is now, I think we really can benefit from engaging with some of these existing organisations that Councillor Smidden points to.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's probably a good point for where the comments I made earlier, which were out of place, are probably more relevant at this point, but I won't go over them again. But the comment I want to now make, I think, focuses on a number of points, a number of these bullet points, particularly the new normal and this theme of building back better. And over the course of this pandemic, what a lot of people have realised is that people who perhaps live in a city 5 days a week and then travel out to the country for the weekends don't necessarily need to do that. And people will have changed the way they work dramatically over the last sort of 7 to 10 weeks. And because we rely so heavily in this area on tourism, I think a lot of people will realise that they can live in areas like the South Hams, whereas usually sometimes it would only be for holiday purposes, permanently. And that could be really important in terms of assisting both the tourist and indeed the hospitality industry, which is really dead at the moment. And I think, I'm not quite sure how the council assists or supports that at this particular time, but I think it's something certainly to consider going forward. Thank you.
Can you put that into a clear and concise point to be included in the appendix, please?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, good. Councillor Brazil.
Yes, just one of my normal bugbears, and that is that I think what this has illustrated, particularly as we come out of lockdown, is how vitally important our public toilets are to our tourism industry. And I very much hope that before we think about closing any more public toilets, we think long and hard about the damage that will do to the tourism industry in general. I appreciate that it costs us money, but it is absolutely vital that we present ourselves as a lovely place to come and visit, which is clean and without, I mean, some of the stories I've heard are absolutely appalling, quite frankly, of what's been going on. So public toilets, I think, we've just got to keep them open. on that, I do think that if we are going to have more people visiting and more people visiting our beaches and tourist facilities around the coast, we're going to have to be looking at increasing our car parking capacity, which of course we can make money out of. But I just think that if, you know, again, if people want to come and come to the seaside, then they're going to want to park their car somewhere. Town centres. I don't know if people saw what Plymouth are doing, but Plymouth have, my understanding is that Plymouth got together with a lot of local producers, all independent local producers, and started acting as a sort of central focus for deliveries just from local producers. And I think it's something we should definitely explore. Members may be aware or remember what we had something similar to that in this area. It was called Pretty Local, where they sourced all their produce from local within about a 50-mile radius of the, well, it was all within the South Hams. I think they might have gone out to Ashburton or Park Farsley, and that included not just food, etc., but also artisans making things as well. And I think it's something that we should look to facilitate. And finally, did we ever employ the economic growth officer? I know it was in the budget. I wasn't particularly keen on it, but if we haven't, then I would suggest, if we have, then I would suggest that they look very much at this idea of just supporting local businesses and local producers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foss. Councillor Foss. No?
Yeah, I'm here, sorry.
Okay.
My little arrow was on the other screen, sorry. You probably see I put something about farming and fishing. We got to remember that the tourist industry comes down here because of the countryside and all the rest that goes with it. Some of these issues are intertwined. Julian has just touched on one or two things about helping some of the local farmers selling produce and that. I'm not saying we get involved with actually, but we need to promote that. Local food is better than, it hasn't got the carbon footprint for industry, for instance. And I think we need to be thinking a bit broader than just the tourist industry, because if the countryside wasn't looking pretty, for want of a better word, and we have got this patchwork quilt down here, they wouldn't be so keen on coming. So I don't know how we do it, but we certainly need to have all of those in place. And I'm going to probably get shot at by one or two of my Conservative members, but I am inclined to start to agree with Councillor Brazil on the toilets after the issues we've had on the coast this weekend and previous. I mean, we cannot continue to shut toilets for the tourist industry in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with some of what Councillor Foss and also Councillor Brazil has said, because the public toilets and perhaps some of the toilets which parish councils and the Dartmouth Town Council have taken over have not been opened when they should have been open, and that causes problems. We've had problems in my own village here in Stoke Gabriel. The toilets are owned by the parish council. They met on Monday night and they have said they're not going to consider opening them until the next meeting in July. And actually, we've had a lot of problems last weekend because we have a very nice quay here and a lot of people come out. The children go crabbing. They want to go to the loo. There was no loos open to visit, and they've been doing what they needed to do in the residents' gardens down there, which is not very nice. The tourism department, South Hams did have their own tourism department until we had cutbacks probably 10 years ago. We used to have a tourism forum, and we also had an agricultural forum which met on a monthly basis during the winter months. All these were acts when we suffered cutbacks. but I think we do need to consider getting together with various groups from time to time. I know it costs and has to be put together, but they are very important to us, particularly moving on, and we need to think about what's going to happen, not actually in the distant future, but probably within the next few months, because businesses are going to be reopening, hopefully at the beginning of July, and they will need support from us, particularly Dartmouth and the South Embankment. As Chris mentioned earlier, we're going to have to consider our town centres pretty smartish, not in 6 months' time, but in 6 weeks or even less now. So we do need to get our act together, and pretty fast in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris Brook.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, if I could just politely suggest that the toilet position is heard loud and clear. It's absolutely right to make that point, but we probably don't need to have a full debate about toilets now, because I think the wider business issues, some of the ones we haven't spoken about, probably deserve an airing instead, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of points. Yeah, I absolutely agree about the public toilet situation. Actually, unfortunately, certainly there's parts of toilets have experienced what has been also described. It's been pretty unpleasant without them being open. I think we ought to think about a different kind of tourism, perhaps, that could actually benefit us financially. I mean, with some of the open space we've got, and it could also sort of fit into an early recovery in terms of tourism, where we still need to maintain some kind of safety for some tourists as well as residents who need to shield. So things like sort of camper van sites maybe could be done overnight in some of our car parks, raise a bit of extra money, but also help the tourism to kind of start to kick back in. And just thirdly, really, Richard Foss's point about local food, absolutely agree and support it for all the right reasons, including his points about climate emergency and lower carbon footprint. I think we could maybe think about a South Hams or South Devon brand. I mean, that's been a great success, certainly where I lived before in Ireland. That was a hugely important thing that they brought forward, and it's something that maybe we could think about as a local authority in terms of supporting. There's a lot of expertise about how branding works, and that could be something that people could come together under, especially some of the very small producers, and that might be a benefit to a number of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Thank you, Chairman. I think just coming back on what everybody has said, the whole aspect of tourism, I think there's a lot of skill, there's a lot of expertise out there amongst the small tourist information centres around the South Hams and in the wider, who can feed in a lot of that information, a lot of the concerns and the issues. So I think the more active involvement with the small tourist information centres and the larger, wider ones would give us a good picture as to what is needed moving forward. And I think reflecting on what people have said about farming and the fishing industry, there has been so much local produce produced, used, bought and appreciated across the South Hams, that we need to make sure that that continues going forward. We have some fantastic farming in the area, fantastic produce, and I think the promotion of that will assist us greatly. And I think, again, we can pick up on the experiences of those who have been moving that produce out, getting that produce out. We can pick up on that and we can bring that on board and help there. I think that looking forward to sort of the town centres and the sort of new normal, there is a matter of a few weeks in the opening. And so there are going to be changes that are going to be needed in the short term there, which I think can give us a guidance on where we think the sort of town centres need to be, what sort of changes are needed going forward. So I think it's important that we just don't rush into doing some short-term fixes and then discard them. I think look and make sure that what we're doing gives us a good grounding and a good guidance as to what is needed going forward. But I think coming down to it, all of this can really benefit from getting that feedback from the local communities at a local level as to what has helped and is helping at the present time and what they believe, will help going forward. And I think the businesses can really feed into that. And I think that active discussion and cooperation across all the various sort of factors of industry across the South Hams, I think we can be a facilitator in bringing that information out there, which will help move us forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Can I just remind members we've got another 5 themes to do. So if I've got Councillor Sweet and then Councillor Holway, can I make certain that it's dealing with the matter of future development in respect of business? So Councillor Sweet, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's just some excellent comments coming forward, and you know, I think it's all kind of what's all going to sort of tie in with is what the general theme of the reports coming through, that it is all about our capacity to communicate with the local groups, especially with the local business groups and chambers of commerce, to see what the needs are of the local businesses, and actually what's worked through the COVID crisis, and actually to be able to communicate with the local shops who have already been accessing all this local produce from local farms, and maybe there's a way to communicate with them to see what their needs are moving forward. Going back to what Councillor Brown, I think it was, said, that due to flexible working hours, hopefully our local shops are going to have a boost from people actually having a bit more extra time and being able to use the local shops. So, I think there's kind of a lot of threads that have all really tie in well together. And going forward, we've obviously got our kind of initial reopening process, which is unfolding sort of day to day. But I think going forward, I think with some careful planning and really good communication with local business groups, we're in a really good, strong place.
Thank you, Councillor Sweet. Councillor Holwell.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a little bit on the same theme. I think there is room for us to have fora with trade and professional organisations where members and senior officers can meet with people from those trades and organisations and have a general discussion with them as to, if you like, what they want from us, and we can tell them what we can do to help them. And I think that should be something we should try to do with each broad group, probably at least once a year. So just a thought.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Can we move on to community and partnership? And Neil Hawke, would you like to give a short introduction, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the community work stream, we know that there's been a significant amount of positive community action and partnership working to quickly respond to this current crisis. Existing groups have expanded the support that they've provided within the community, and new groups have quickly formed where there were gaps in support. As community leaders, members of this council have worked incredibly closely and effectively with town and parish councils, community groups and other local organisations to support them with local responses. As we develop our recovery plan, we need to work closely with those partners and communities to fully understand how we can best continue to support their longer term resilience. We need to recognise and value our members, communities and partners as experts with the knowledge and skills to help shape our community recovery plans. As a council, the pandemic has seen us work closer than before with a wide range of partner organisations, all coming together to achieve a common aim in supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. In our recovery, we need to consider how we take this work forward, how we develop relationships with existing partners such as Citizens Advice, CVS, town and parish councils, but also build on those new relationships that have come about directly as a result of the pandemic. Just one example of that is where we worked with local schools, identified welfare needs within some of our families. Well, actually, we could gatekeep those funds, or we could give them to schools through a partnership arrangement so that they can enact that support at source. They know the families much better than us, so why put blockers in place? Let's give funding to the schools so that they can then provide that to those families. A quicker response, but just one example of where we're working differently and tapping into our partners' strengths to provide a more reactive support. It's also going to be really important that we understand from our partners their views on our current relationship and how they feel we can continue to work closely. and more effectively in the future. We've heard different views this morning about how effective our response has been, how effectively our members and community groups have found that. Well, let's tap into that. Let's really understand the data and the feeling to support our plan. I think on the whole, the initial feedback has been that the cluster groups have worked well. Again, I know there have been different views and some have been stronger than others. But do we take that work forward? How do we take that forward? And as we begin to emerge from the crisis, we need to work together with all partners to ensure that our recovery plans enable our communities to be informed, engaged and empowered by the council to make a positive impact, but ensuring that we don't duplicate existing support. I think just to echo Councillor Rowe's comments earlier today, there are already so many community groups doing fantastic work. We don't want to be duplicating, we don't want to be overlapping with the support that's already out there, but can we complement it? So I think that's all to say as part of an intro. Any questions?
Okay, right. I've got two questions that were given in advance. There's the question from Councillor Reeve. Yes, that's on the screen. Councillor Reeve, do you want to add anything further to that question, or shall we go straight to the answer?
Well, no, I think what we've been talking about this afternoon, I think a lot of these points have been covered, but I just think it is important to keep our parish council councillors connected to the council, and if there's a way of doing a user-friendly leaflet or whatever, just so they feel involved and feel part of us, really.
Thank you. Neil, do you want to respond?
I can do, Chairman. Absolutely, Councillor Reeve. I mean, certainly, as Drew said earlier on today, our response will continue and our resources will continue. We've been pretty proactive in providing updates to our town and parish councils. I think a leaflet, the worry with the leaflet is that as soon as we've printed it, it becomes out of date. But we do need to ensure that we keep those communication channels in place and keep our town and parish councils updated, be that through members, through newsletters, whatever channels work.
Thank you. Right, I've got as a question, an advanced question from Councillor Smurden.
Just remind me what it was. Oh, there we are. Right. Yes. Yeah, that would be the concern. As I mean, obviously everything is under review, and I'm sure these things will be taken into account. But obviously, as the wider economy opens up and the district's needs start to go back to normal, a lot of the senior officers are going to need to concentrate on their own jobs. One, I would imagine. Yeah, those two comments are, just for discussion. It seems to me a logical thing that we involve the locality officers. Maybe not at every one, but it would be. I think it would probably be good to pull them into it. Thank you.
Neil, do you want to answer that?
I can, yes, absolutely, Councillor Smith. I mean, those are exactly the sorts of things we should be considering through our recovery planning. Earlier in the response phase, we had about 20 officers supporting the South Hams cluster arrangements. Many of those have already gone back to their own roles. We're now down to about 6 officers spending about 10% of their time supporting that community support. What does that look like in the future? I mean, that's clearly what we'll be deciding over the coming months. And I think that the benefit of our staffing model is that we can be flexible with that support. So if we need more people at any point in time, we can pull more people back in from relevant service areas. So yeah, keep it under review. But as with all of the work streams through our recovery, they are so interlinked. So in terms of the service delivery that we'll come to later, it's clearly linked to the support we can provide to the community response.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Rose, you put forward a very detailed proposal that runs over, I think it's 2 or 3 slides. This will be included in the appendix, so there's no need for you to go into too much detail. I wonder if you could just briefly summarise what's in your proposal, bearing in mind that it's going into the appendix.
Absolutely, thank you, Chairman. I think the essence of all of what I've been putting forward is, perhaps just scroll on to, there's maybe the next slide from it.
Can you move on to the next slide, Darren? Yes.
I mean, okay, well, while that's happening, so the essence really is everything we've already been talking about. There's nothing kind of new or different here. What this proposes is essentially a way in which we can take the next step towards what we've been talking about. So it's very much about first, it's looking at, okay, one of the key things I think is about moving away from the idea of sustainability and into the idea of regeneration, because sustainability implies that we've got what we want and we want to keep it, and the reality is that we really haven't got what we want. For a long time now, our community, our environment and our economy has been degenerating. So this means that if we're going to approach a kind of status quo that we're happy to be in, then we're going to need a regenerative approach. And of course within this, especially with the crisis, with the pandemic and also with the climate crisis, resilience is the kind of key word. It's like, how can we be resilient to these crises? And what makes resilience is connections. It's like a web or a net, or wherever you find strength, it's because there's lots of different things that are interlinking. So very much it has to be about finding ways to connect the different strands of what's happening within our communities and within different organizations together. So one of the, and of course, who knows how to create resilience in their local community? It's the local community. Someone in London isn't going to know how to make Totnes resilient, just as someone in Plymouth might not know how to, whatever, So, and again, linking with this sort of build back better, actually, Councillor Holway at the beginning, you said it all really. You said that, you, as a councillor, you went off into your community and found out what was happening and reached out to your local organisations and asked them what you needed to do to how you could support them. And that's basically what I'm proposing here, is that as members, but also the officers, but especially us as members, we have this ability to go out into our communities and to really identify who are the key organizations who have come together and to help with this pandemic, but also who are the perhaps organizations that are under a kind of different banner but share goals. So there are many community groups and organizations that have come together specifically in relation to the climate change agenda, and actually the climate change agenda and the kind of pandemic response or pandemic preparation is the same. You need community resilience. I mean, obviously there are other things that perhaps don't. It's like a Venn diagram. No, the connection is the community resilience. So the proposal here essentially is that we as a council have this ability to reach out across our district to the myriad of different organisations and to support them in whatever way we can. And one of the ways we can support them is, and I've had a number of conversations with officers, is about connecting them to funding sources. So that doesn't mean us funding them, it means us connecting them to existing funding sources as they emerge, so that we're able to support these groups in creating projects which can basically build resilience. I've got slightly ahead of myself. The first thing is to really ask them, how do you envision your community becoming more resilient for future crises? So, the first step, consultation. The second step is supporting them to connect with other organisations, creating shared goals, shared visions, shared projects. And then the third step is to link them to funding and resources and information. Now, there are a number of organisations who are already working across South Hams. It's mentioned in here, the Bioregional Learning Centre and Transition Towns, all sorts of different ones. That's just two examples, who have a phenomenal amount of expertise at their disposal. They do things like resilience cafes, where they'll have an expert on one specific item and people can tune in, and that expert will essentially provide a free training, and then the next week it's a different expert within a different. This is just an example of how this expertise is out there, and these organisations have already, if the Bioregional Learning Centre, for example, has already attempted to engage with South Hams, I think around 3 or 4 times, in order to do exactly this kind of stuff. And so far we've just kind of sidelined them, but there's a real potential now to start opening our arms to all of the people in our district who are begging us to come and do this work. And personally, I would really love to have some future meetings with some more officers, and I'd love to work with some of the executive members. I know that I think Nikki, you're on community, and I think Councillor Hawkin, I think you're on residents. Maybe I'd love to have a couple of conversations with you guys and see how we could work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Rose. Thank you. I've got Councillor Foss.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is a comment more about parish councils. I represent 6, in this pandemic, 3 of them have gone really up market, and they've had Zoom meetings regularly and done exceptionally well. And the other 3, the only communication is through the clerk. And without kind of too fine a point, we know that clerks can be a bit picky as to what they tell the rest of the parish council at times. And I feel that they're missing out. And it's something we need to be able to help some of these smaller parish councils to get up to speed for the community, to get more value from what we're offering them. And if there's a way we can do that, I'd be only too pleased. I've done it myself with helping 2 with broadband. In fact, Councillor Brazil's done the same, because he covers my patch as county councillor, to try and enable them. But I still think that there are people that are missing out on what we got available.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. I want to pick up a point that Neil Hawke made about the schools and the financing being attached to them for their projects. What my feeling about the town and parish council reactions and the positive feeling we have about all of their actions is that they've had agency to do work on the ground. They have taken control, and it's a practical effect of devolution of power to the local community. And that's the way for us to build on this, the continuing to work with these many groups, particularly my excellent cluster group leader, Cassandra Harrison, has identified so many groups within Ivybridge, and we want them to work, but let's give them the power to do so on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to just to say about networks. I think we've often had meetings at the district council for parish councillors and clerks to come to sort of like great get-togethers. I think if we were to do those possibly virtually, I think that might make it a lot more possible for some of them, and it'd probably be a lot cheaper, etc., etc. But I would have thought a sort of kind of a quarterly or a 6-monthly get-together as a network of those different parish councils, but maybe sort of on a cluster basis, but looking at what their links are as well. I mean, so for example, like the Totnes area, where we've had like Totnes Caring, the food bank, some of the officers have been to those meetings, so they'll know there's been sort of between 25 and 30 people every Monday we've been having these meetings, and they've been absolutely invaluable. It's been an opportunity to share stuff, and I would have thought to have that kind of a resilience forum that we would have every sort of 3 to 6 months would keep those channels going. It would listen to what their needs are. I mean, just to give an example of needs, I mean, one of the things that we had to provide in Totnes Town Council was a massive walk-in refrigeration to enable the food bank to be able to store more food. So there's things like there's really practical things, but I think it means that they could share ideas, and it would mean that we are sustaining a emergency resilience system, because this pandemic, maybe not this one, but another one could really come back soon again. And if we keep, we maintain what we've got and build on it, I think we would actually find that we'd have a greater spread, because people would be encouraged because they'd see what other people are doing and think, oh, that doesn't sound so difficult and it works there, and just sharing the ideas and information. And I think that would also retain the contacts. And if we just had like one CRO per cluster, the 4 main clusters that we've got in South Hams, I think that would be adequate. So it hopefully wouldn't put too much of a loading on, and gives us a sort of stepping down plan going forward. And I also think that we need to consider spaces as well in the main towns for depots. I mean, that's something that's been really critical, as I said a minute ago, and I think that's something we should look at. I mean, certainly, personally, I'm trying to feed it into our neighbourhood plans to make it possible for them, because everybody needs somewhere that is accessible, that people can just pick up stuff or run the food bank or whatever they need to do. So those are 2 key things that I think that we should be looking at in terms of how we work with our communities and partners.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor O'Callaghan.
Yes, thanks very much. Yes, very much agree with what's been said here. As Joseph said, communities best understand local needs. And I think Neil was saying town and parish councils, how do we continue to develop the relationships with the council and town and parishes? Perhaps we should think of them as a partnership. The headline above town and parish councils is partnerships. We should think of them perhaps as a partnership, another one, rather than perhaps town and parish councils as passive receivers of services, which all too often I feel that they're treated as, and that they think they're treated as. And perhaps, you know, in the past, I know that in the planning system, I feel that they've been overlooked. You know, key plans for town centres should be spoken about with town and parish councils as partners. What do you want for your town? Not, we have worked up this scheme for your town. What do you think about it? It's already way down the road. That way lies dissent and division and problems, and also perhaps money spent unwisely. So I feel that we should change that picture. There's a lot of people have been saying this sort of thing, and treat the town and parish councils as partners in what we want to do in the future. Keep them informed, keep them consulted with, welcome ideas from them in whichever way we want to do that. Not treat them as passive receivers of services. They have ideas to put forward. They are best able, as Joseph said, to understand local needs, as perhaps members are as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Councillor Holway. Councillor Holway? No? Councillor Pannell then. Hello? Councillor Pannell.
Sorry, with you now. I've been having trouble to get a message in to speak. I hope this hasn't been said before, but I find it ironic that a few years ago the role of any emergency planning was taken out of the hands of parish and town councils and handed basically to the county council with some assistance from the district council. We've seen this fall apart when we've had snow on the A38 and things like that, with no one able to take any responsibility locally, and my wife and myself ending up as a nerve centre for volunteer efforts. And it concerns me that here we are, the parish councils and town councils have been a major player in providing this support for the community. There seems to be a disconnect between what we're actually doing and what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask for Councillor Holway again.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost everything for a minute.
Okay, right.
Just to make a few points, if I may, please. I think we need to, if you like, work out a way of sharing the volunteers with the parish councils. I think on a normal day-to-day basis, we would be better thinking of the volunteers as belonging to the parishes and the towns. I think we should encourage the parishes and the town councils to join the Devon Resilience Forum if they haven't already, and attend their meetings, because there they can find out how to construct their emergency plans, and if they do that, they can then include all the details of the volunteers so that everything is kept up to date and they've something to refer to when they need to. When it comes to an actual emergency, yes, we do then need to be able to communicate directly with the volunteers in parallel with the parish councils. I think with regard to funding, something I've done now for, well, several years, we get information from the community, rural community network. Now, I copy that to umpteen people who I know in my parishes are interested in getting funding. That's something we could all do as members, because we all get the information. Another thing that I instituted a long time ago when I was chair of parish council, and that is in the Ivybridge cluster, our clerks meet probably about every 3 or 4 months or so. They go to a pub, the parish councils pay for their lunch, and they have a speaker or they exchange information among themselves. And I think that's something that does a lot of good. Finally, with regard to community response team, I think what we should do is to get our present locality officers to do this. And I now realise that a meeting with them, not necessarily every week, but maybe every couple of weeks or so, little group for a small cluster would be a useful exchange of thoughts and ideas. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can we move on to finance now? Financial stability. Lisa, would you like to give an introduction to this?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. So yes, within the financial stability theme, one of the key things we're going to be doing, as I said previously, is completing those monthly government returns on the COVID costs and loss of income. And the reason that's quite important is in terms of receiving any further government funding, the government are really looking for that to be evidence-based. So they're collecting data nationally on what costs have councils incurred, what are the losses of income. In particular, the Society of District Council Treasurers has commissioned LG Futures. LG Futures are local government finance specialists to collect all that evidence on just for the district council, just for the districts. So we're going to be using that, looking at that and using that very much as an evidence base to go back to the government to say that district councils do need more funding. So that's a key piece of work which is going on at the moment, and all district councils have sent off their May returns to LG Futures. In terms of those monthly budget monitoring reports, as I said, the first one will be coming to executive on the 18th of this month. That will be very detailed. That will look at all of our income streams. That will tell members exactly what our income amounts we've received have been for April and for May. And then as we move through the year, we will be presenting that picture to members and firming up what that budget position is looking like. We do need to do a review of all of our statutory expenditure and our discretionary expenditure, and we will be looking at a comprehensive review of all of our earmarked reserves. So members will be aware currently our earmarked reserves are around about £11 million and our unearmarked reserves are £2 million at the moment. And we will be doing a very comprehensive review of the whole of the Council's capital programme. So looking at the projects which were approved as part of the 2021 capital programme, but also all of those which are currently in previous capital programmes and in progress. There was a question from Councillor Austin around looking at that process around, I think you asked a question about taxation and council tax. Members will be aware currently £170 of an average 2000 council tax bill for a Band D property comes to South Hams. So at the moment we take about a 9% share of that council tax bill. In terms of council tax levels, that's clearly a member decision, but members will also be aware that there is a £5 currently, there's a £5 limit on that, so that any higher than that would require a council tax referendum anyway. I think in terms of that, we need to look at the process. So I think what's worked very well in the past has been the member budget workshops. So we will be looking to put some dates in the diary for those and some informal council briefings as well. And also if members have ideas that you'd like us to look at that process, please contact myself or contact Pauline, who's our head of finance practice. Because that's something we will be working up over the next couple of weeks and couple of months. And nationally, we're going to be working with the LGA, the Society of District Council Treasurers, and also all of our Devon colleagues as well. So the lobbying that we've been doing with government has very much been on a sort of Team Devon basis and looking at the financial position across all Devon councils.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I have some advanced questions. Darryl, I wonder if you could put them on the screen. Right, yes, advanced. Councillor Pennell.
Hello, thank you.
Your questions here, do you want to add to it, or shall we?
I need to say, because I had an answer from the leader earlier on about the borrowing to invest. I hear what the leader says. I think it's very difficult to second guess what the government is actually going to do and whether they will see regeneration the same way as we do. And all I would ask is perhaps we could ask that members are the situation is monitored when the government comes out with its proposals or its new rules, and that members are updated as and when things change.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. The consultation deadline has been extended for that Public Works Loan Board borrowing consultation to the 31st of July. There are going to be road shows set up for virtually for Section 151 officers to attend, so that we can ask questions around that consultation. We will be drafting a response to that in consultation with executive members, and a copy of that will be circulated to all members. So yes, thank you for that, Chair.
Okay, there's two questions then from Councillor Mackay. Can they be put up on the screen? Councillor Mackay, do you want to add anything to these? You've got two questions. This first is on the screen. Shall I just ask for an answer, or do you want to say something to it?
Just very briefly, I mean, the motivation behind the question is largely there is a sort of a worrying sense of optimism about what's going to be happening in over the next 12 months and possibly 5 years, really, and on the basis of the figures that we've been seeing and what Lisa has been presenting to us, it actually does look pretty horrible. And this 6.3 million drop in net budget, I don't believe should be seen as a one-off cost. I mean, it's not something that we're going to have to bear this year. It's probably something that we're going to have to bear for several years. And I just wondered what her view on that was, and just to say that any recovery plan needs to probably err on the side of caution, given the economic background that we're in at the moment. I mean, the fact that we are now the highest R0 metric area in the country, and I've just had a friend locally that lives in Southampton who's gone down with it, who's not a public-facing individual or a key worker, and he's a bit bemused as to how he's got it. So it just shows how careful you've got to be and how pernicious this thing is. So it's the need for caution is really all I'm trying to promote here. And
okay, I'll put your question to Lisa. Lisa, would you like to answer the question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I think we said in the main part of the report that we were estimating that it could be anywhere between a half to 2/3 of our £9 million budget. I think those figures obviously were put together a couple of weeks ago, before we knew about the fact that we would be able to reopen the car parks. And we've got further clarity, as I say, of our April and May figures now. We will be bringing a monthly budget monitoring report on the 18th of June, so that will give the latest figures. And of those figures, obviously we know we've already got 900,000 that we can take off that, because that's the government funding that we've been given so far, and we are continuing to lobby for more. I think when you see the budget monitoring report, some of those will be one-off costs or sunk costs or one-off losses of income, but some of those will be recurring and will be annual things that we will need to build into the new medium-term financial strategy. I just wanted to point out as well, we did receive a letter from Alex Skinner, who's the Director for Local Government Finance at MHCLG, very recently, and they were saying on the back of the sort of May government returns that they felt that councils had already been given sufficient funding, because they were only looking at the extra expenditure that councils have paid out. What they hadn't taken into account was the loss of income that councils have had. So we are very much lobbying to that effect, that loss of income, obviously for district councils, is the much bigger figure, not just the extra expenditure.
But can I just come back very quickly?
Yes, because you've got another question as well. So can we?
Well, I mean, it's just to say that we have got as I say in the question, unprecedented levels of peacetime national debt, there's only so much money that the government has at its disposal without raising taxes, etc., which is determined not to do at the moment. So the likelihood of our getting further funding is probably quite remote, isn't it?
Yeah. Right, would you like to move on to question 2, Councillor McCann? It's on the screen. Do you want to add to that, or shall I ask Lisa to answer?
I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Right, Lisa, could you give the answer to question 2, please?
Yeah. I think it would be premature at this stage to rule out any options without assessing the relative merits of each option. And we will be looking at all options and presenting those to members as part of the budget workshops, but also as part of the reports going to the committee cycles in September.
Thank you. Thank you. If I could now move on to the questions from Councillor Brazil, if that could be put on the screen, please. Councillor Brazil, do you want to add to the questions, or shall I ask Lisa to answer them? Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, just happy for them to go out and answer them. I mean, I can see question 2. That was almost exactly the same as John's previous question. Can I just say I think we absolutely should rule it out. If we don't rule it out, the government will definitely gobble it all up. There are plenty of councils that are going to go to the wall very soon, and if we're not careful, we're going to be, they're going to take all our assets, all our reserves, and then send us to the wall. And I just think that we're dealing a shorthand to the South Hams residents if we allow that.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to answer the questions, please, Lisa?
Yes, thank you. So question 1 was around will the council rule out use of earmarked reserves? Just similar to my previous response, really, I think it's premature at this stage to rule out any options. I think we need to look at the merits of all options. We will be looking at a comprehensive review of all earmarked reserves. I think members will remember from previous budget workshops that we've done, we did a list of all of our reserves and went through those as part of the workshops. So we do need to look at those and assess those as part of the process. And I think we need to take, the next couple of weeks and months to do that.
Sorry.
Should I move on to question 2?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So question 2, will we rule out the sale of assets? Again, I think it would be premature to rule out any options. We need to assess all options. We will be carrying out a review of all current projects within the approved capital programme. And again, similarly, just as much as looking at the revenue budget, we need to look at the capital budget. And again, we've done that previously in member budget workshops.
Number 3.
So number 3, will the council lobby the government to allow local authorities to capitalise the COVID debt? The council will lobby the government for further freedoms and flexibilities over its finances. So things like capital receipts flexibilities, changes to the minimum revenue provision regulations. So that's repaying the principal of debt. It is currently quite a grey area whether councils can borrow in the short term for revenue purposes. The rules in the main are that councils can only borrow for a capital purpose, but we do need to assess all options, and we will be looking at all items of expenditure as part of that review.
Question 4.
So where are we with the government and the switch of domestic properties to business rates? We have lobbied for this, and the leader recently also raised this issue when she was giving evidence to the Select Committee in May. Our local MP, Anthony Magno, has made it one of his central campaign platforms at present and is lobbying hard both with the Treasury and with BEIS. And the leader is working with him on this. Our MP is asking for any reforms to be tied in with HMRC so that the burden of determination between business rates and council tax does not fall on councils, and it's an absolute determination, with the presumption being that council tax is paid unless determined otherwise. There is also a fundamental review of business rates going on within government. So they, on the 11th of March, government issued their terms of reference for that fundamental review. And one of the things they have said they're going to look at as part of those reforms is the effectiveness and operation of different reliefs.
Okay, and finally, question 5.
And sorry, if I could just add to question 4,
sorry.
that fundamental review of business rates will conclude by the autumn. So that's the timetable that the government are currently working to. Thank you. And question 5, as part of the recovery and response plan, members will have the opportunity to put options forward. This would clearly be a policy decision for members. To charge double council tax for second homes would require a change to primary legislation.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Abbott who wishes to speak. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Just a small point, of course, we have more than one MP, so we have 2 local MPs. Rather than speaking in general terms, I'd like to suggest a specific item, and that's the Marks and Spencer's purchase, which was £5 million. And rather than carry that debt forward, it seems like a significant one, which would solve a bit of our problem if we just sold it on. That's it.
Would you like to answer that, Lisa?
Yes, I can answer that. We aren't able to do that. So at the point we take that debt out, that debt is fixed for the 50-year period, and it's also on a fixed interest rate. So the only way that you could refinance that debt would be there would be an early repayment penalty, and it would not make financial sense to do so.
Thank you. We have a proposal from Councillor Mackay. Can that be put on the screen, please?
What?
Yes. Councillor Mackay, your proposal, I think it runs over 2 pages.
Sorry, I've forgotten I'd done this. Okay, yep.
Do you want to, can I just say that this will go into the appendix, so there's no need for you to go through it in detail. If you could just give a brief summary, that will be sufficient.
I understand that there is a problem with the public loaned work board insofar as that they've changed the rules and they're looking to restrict what councils can invest in their commercial investment loans, and it appears to include anything that will have a yield. And I did have an email exchange with Lisa about this, but as yet, as I understand it, there's no real clarification as to what the rules are until the consultation ends at the end of July. So, but the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to invest in anything that is along the lines of the current capital investment programme. And I was asking the question whether you could do it for even for things like solar farms, but so we should be looking to other aspects of what the public loan will. And one of the things is social housing. There is definitely money available there, and the rates are down by 1%, and we should be looking to this as a means of providing social housing, and also in the long term generating a revenue stream for the council. And the other interesting aspect, which I only discovered myself very recently, was that you can the parish councils can also and town councils can borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, and with permission from Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government, and we should perhaps be looking to partner with parish councils for projects whereby they can draw down on these funds. That's really the nub and the gist of what I was trying to suggest there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I see John's proposals. I wasn't actually wanting to speak on that. I wanted to come back as a comment on some of Lisa's answers.
Yes, okay. Can you, if you could put those into, if you want points to be put into the appendix, could you make them clear and concise so that they can go in?
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I have a fundamental disagreement with Lisa here, in that she's saying we shouldn't rule anything out, and I'm saying we should. And my understanding is that if we as the committee decide that we should rule these things out, then that will go forward as a policy. It's not written that we shouldn't rule anything out. It's just an opinion of our finance officer. Can I just commenting on that? There are councils in the position with no reserves and very few assets that are going to go to the wall, and so be it. What worries me is that we're going to use all our reserves. We're going to sell off. We're going to have a fast sale of assets, and then we'll find ourselves in the same position as other councils. But we've done all of this. I think we need to take urgent steps to ring fence our reserves so they can't be spent to pay off the debt. And at the same time, what I've been urging this council to do for some time is to devolve our assets down to the parish and town councils, so that if the government comes sniffing around trying to pinch them, or indeed we get turned into a unitary authority, which I understand is going on now, that the ownership of those assets actually doesn't belong to the district council, but belongs to the town and parishes, and they won't be able to be taken away. Because as I said before, otherwise I think we are doing a disservice to our local residents here and our local communities here in the South Hams.
Thank you. Steve Molyneux.
Thank you, Chair. Julian, I think what Lisa's saying, she's not saying we are or we aren't. What she's saying is at this point, it's an ever-changing position and we can't rule anything out. Now, in terms of the purpose for this meeting, you can absolutely put forward the proposals to the executive that we shouldn't do that, and that's for the executive to consider. So that's the reason for doing this meeting. So I think your comments are absolutely noted and will be put into the report that goes forward to executive. But at this point, as officers, it would be unwise for us to rule anything out, and the whole purpose of this meeting is to get members' opinions, and that's your opinion, and that's fine. And Lisa's not saying that will or won't happen. It's just that's the process. So that's all I would say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, I think we've done financial stability. I don't think there are any more speakers. So can we move on to communications, please? So could I ask Leslie Crocker to introduce that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I think what we've learned through the pandemic about communications is just how important communications is, and we've heard an awful lot today from members who are talking about our need to get our communications right in various different ways with the public and with our partners. I think that as a starting point, where I'd like to go with this, and I'd welcome members' input, is for us to really review and look at those channels of communication to make sure that as we move forward, we have the right channels in place to be able to support all of the people and all of the communities in the right way, and really harness and support those relationships that have been built throughout the crisis in ways that some we've heard from some of the councillors today, and really question, have we got the right channels? I think what we realise now from after the pandemic is that the way people consume information is changing and continues to change. We have historically been very much looking at presenting our news via press releases and very reliant on the local paper as a medium that we're pushing information out through. And I think even more now, there's an opportunity here for us to really embrace those digital skills that we've learned throughout the pandemic, and members in particular who've been really key and centre in that, many of them standing up and creating video content and digital content that we've been pushing out directly to the public via our own channels. I think perhaps now is the time for us to really embrace that, support each other, train each other and help each other to do more of the same. I think what we're learning from the local papers nationally is that there has been a continual decline in newspaper sales. Even since the pandemic, national publications are reporting a really sharp decline in sales because people just aren't out there buying. There's also been a big drop in ad sales. And what's that saying to us is that people are now receiving a lot more of their information digitally. I mean, even our local publications, I don't know how many of you are aware, but even before the pandemic, we're only selling 7,000 copies across the whole of the South Hams of the South Hams newspapers. Of course, they've all got digital platforms now, which again reinforces that need for us to consider how we present our information digitally. But as an extension to that, I think looking at people then who aren't digital and don't receive their information digitally, that's where we've got to look at communication as not just about pushing out information, but really supporting those relationships that have been built and those people in communities that have stood up and presented themselves as willing to support their towns and parishes through this pandemic, and working with them to reach those people who aren't digitally connected, whilst perhaps giving them some digital platforms to enable that to move forward, things like digital magazines or digital apps or whatever mechanisms we think are most suitable. But a review of that space, I think, is really important. I also think moving forward that what's come out of the pandemic is that we've changed how we present information as well. At the very start of the pandemic, we were looking at the need very quickly to get messages out to people, and we separated the information backed from political messaging. So, you know, the toilets are closed rather than we're trying to make a decision because, and that enabled us as operations to get messages out very, very quickly, whilst at the same time we created a platform for members in the way of digital videos to be able to get messages out that they wanted to get out to their communities. And that was very well received. And what we did see is that publications who are online even used some of those videos directly in their publications and push them out for us. So if we create the content, there is space out there for it to be presented. We've also done a lot of building of relationships through this pandemic, working very much with the Local Resilience Forum to work on a wider voice, a regional voice, a Team Devon voice as well. We've got a communications team across all the Devon authorities, and we've been working on campaigns that are a regional message. And I think as a communications team, we've been instrumental in that and strengthening South Hams' voice within that regional grouping as well. And I very much welcome members' views on that and whether they would like us to continue down that vein of building those relationships, which I think have been so far been really successful in getting our message out to a much wider audience. And finally, then again, yes, just the technology and how we need now to enhance and grow the technical skills that have been learned across the whole of the council, including streaming. What we've done here is we've created live streaming to the public to enable your meetings to be publicised to the public, but we've done it with existing technology. And I think what we need to do now is look at what we've achieved and say, you know, everybody's done a fantastic job in embracing live streaming like this so quickly, but can we do it better? Can we integrate it with other platforms to actually give a more two-way conversation with the public or a better user experience? But I think overall what we have seen a lot of is that the fact that councils are looked to at times of crisis. Just to give you an example, our Facebook page, just a Facebook page in South Hams, had an average daily reach of about 1,900 peak before the pandemic, the 3 months leading up to the pandemic, and the 3 months of the pandemic that jumped to 7,300 as a daily reach, and we've increased our followers by 39% in the last 3 months. So I think that shows just how much that people do look to us in these times, and now we've found these new audiences, we've made these new relationships, we really need to look at now how we communicate with them, enhance it and improve it. And I welcome any questions that
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Councillor Rose. Councillor Rose.
Apologies, 1 second. I was just switching over to my new headphone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, yes.
Brilliant. I was just wanting to add in that as well as the digital side of things, it's obviously one of the most kind of effective ways that we can get our messages out is to be using also the kind... Sorry?
I think it'd be easy if you turn your video on, and it's just, because I think it's crackling up.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
okay. Great. Okay. So just to also be using the kind of networks that we're talking about community outreach in terms of building resilience and helping communities to support themselves. But I think that's also a really effective way of getting information out, especially to the people who are the most vulnerable, who aren't necessarily on computers. I'm thinking specifically of elderly people. So using the kind of these kind of networks to get key information out, I think could also be looked at as a really effective way of reaching some of the people who we wouldn't be reaching online. Yeah, that's basically it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to actually really congratulate the communications team over the last 3 months. I think they've done a really, really good job. I mean, there's been so much information flying in every direction. To turn it out in sensible sort of like, easy to receive bite-sized chunks, I think has been a really good benefit for everybody concerned. And certainly I know that my parish councils have found it very helpful. So I just wanted to feed that back really as much, and say how clear it was, and also to say how it sort of so clearly linked into how we've got other communications going on the web links, etc. So no further comment really, except to acknowledge how good it was.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor O'Callaghan, have you got something to say?
Sorry, I typed it out instead of saying it. I just was agreeing with Jackie. I didn't really want to repeat what she said.
Okay.
Just useful information has come out from the communications team during the crisis. So that was all I wanted.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on this?
Chairman, it's Steve Molyneux again. Just to point out, we're now at 4:05 and we've got 2 themes to go. So
we'll move on to the next one then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do they cut the power off at 4 o'clock?
No, officers have got other meetings to go to, that's all.
Okay, right, okay. Right, if we could move on to governance, to Catherine Bowen, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, as part of the recovery framework, it's very important we consider the governance procedures and issues around that. As we mentioned earlier in the discussion of earlier themes, the pandemic has had its real positives and has made us think about doing things differently and presenting new opportunities. Today's remote meeting is a perfect example of that and fits squarely into this governance theme. I'm confident that members will wish to build on those opportunities and consider the current governance arrangements, which actually underpin all of what we do. It's always thought of as a bit of a dull area, but get the governance right and then it facilitates all of those other themes that we've been talking about earlier on. And this is your opportunity as members to challenge the way we do things at the moment and come up with some new areas to explore. Nothing has been predetermined here, and the bullets on the screen are just prompts really. So I'd welcome member input in which areas should be included in these priorities. For example, we've got the remote meetings we're talking about now. Do we want to extend those after May next year, assuming the legislation's there, either for, either wholly and in part for the formal member meetings, and do members want that to be the new normal for informal meetings, and wherever that's practicable? We could do hybrid meetings. There are all sorts of things you could ask us to explore there. And also with regards to specific bodies such as Development Management Committee, and we could challenge the way we do with site visits. We could have the officers videoing all the relevant information for members and presenting them back. So that would obviate the need for members to currently go out on site inspections for so many hours. Again, this cross theme with the parish councils, I'm not entirely clear if it sits here, but it's a good opportunity to repeat how to act differently with the parish and towns. Do you want to engage further with these councils? I think it's clear that we do. Do we want to involve more powers to them? How do we want to engage with them? All of those things need to be thrown into the mix. And again, joint work, and we can't ignore that. It's shown that we can work really, really well between South Hams and West Devon, and to rethink those joint meetings. Perhaps this is a good opportunity. There's lots of other things I could go on, but I'm sure that members I've got ideas into their heads. The other one, of course, is the member engagement. We would like some feedback on how you would like members to be further engaged with all of these processes, how to get involved in early dialogues, being kept informed, and how to facilitate those sort of meetings. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. We have an advanced question from Councillor Mackay. Can that be put on the screen, please?
Councillor Payne.
as a question.
Councillor Pennington, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Mackay, there's your question. Do you want to add to that, or shall I just request an answer?
Just request an answer. Can I just say that with regard to finance, going back to finance, there was two other points, 3 and 4, and I think.
Sorry, Councillor, I can't go back.
I'm just pointing out that we've skipped 2, so I hope they end up in the minutes somehow or something.
Yeah, okay. So you now can we go back to the question on governance, please? The slide. Yes. Okay. So do you just want an answer to this?
Yeah,
then?
I just want an answer, basically. Yes.
Okay, Catherine, would you like to answer that, please?
The general gist is that the discussions around the unitary status continue nationwide, are now high up in the agenda in some regions. It's not the case in Devon. We're not actively involved in any discussions at this moment, as it's not considered to be an issue. Obviously, if that position changes, we will review it and come back to members with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a question from Councillor Pennington.
Yes, Chairman. Many of us, with regards to bullet point 3, external town and parish councils, external bodies. Many of us, I know I do, have excellent relations with our locality officers. Now, I would like to see more activity with the town and parish councils from locality officers, and I would like to propose that all locality officers attend regularly town and parish council meetings so that they can keep in touch also with the members of the parish and town councils in the same sort of detail that I do. Okay, and I would like to propose that they do they do that.
Councillor Pennington,
as part of their duties.
Yep, Councillor Pennington, there's no need to make a formal proposal. That will be included within Appendix 1 that I mentioned earlier on in this matter. Okay, if I could turn to Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just coming back to the request to have members' views on whether to use this format in future in terms of remote viewing. I think in general it's brilliant because it saves obviously a lot of petrol miles, it saves people travelling a long way. However, I do feel that in terms of full council meetings, to be there in person is, I think, definitely preferable because of all of the different internet connectivity issues, and then also just kind of being there in person. I think you get a lot more communication. However, for all of the kind of intermediary meetings and informal meetings, I think that absolutely we should be embracing this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to ask if Mrs. Bowen has any indication as to when we might be removing the emergency shutdown of democracy. In other words, the powers that actually stop people, all members, being able to ask questions and put proposals on full council. Will we, for example, be seeing the resumption of normal practices by July?
Chairman, I don't really think that's something for me to respond to. It's a decision for members, not officers. I can facilitate that if that's the will of the membership, but I'm not sure that that's for me to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foss.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is in relation to D&M. It is going to be difficult to do some of the bigger applications remotely. But as far as the pre-meeting that Chairman Julian Brazil and I have with the officers to decide what site visits we're going to have, that can be done remotely. And quite a few other things can be done remotely. But some of the big ones, I think we need to be in the chamber to discuss it properly. But I'm sure that we can do quite a bit of D&M remotely as we're doing it now.
Thank you. Right, there is a advance proposal from Councillor Mackay. It's on the screen. Would you like to just briefly give us a brief description?
Yeah, I mean, I can't be. I think it speaks for itself, and I've been very heartened by the fact that a lot of this has already been said during the course of this meeting anyway. So, yeah, it is what it is.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that. Right, I have no other requests to speak, so I'll move on to service recovery. and I'll ask Sarah Moody to give an introduction to this.
Yes, so thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So the recovery cell is primarily the delivery arm and is about nurturing our new ways of working. One of the success stories that has transpired out of the pandemic response is the case management model and the flexibility to be able to move resources around the organisation seamlessly. Officers have responded well to this and often commented on how they have enjoyed completing new and different pieces of work. We will look to capitalise and build on the flexibility of this to look at the delivery of potentially new services or deliver existing services more efficiently. Staff will be involved in this process also and have been throughout the response phase. There have been a number of surveys to capture staff's views, and we will continue to do this. To ensure we capture the bigger picture around the operation of services, myself, Catherine Bowen as Specialist Manager, and Jim Davis, Customer Service Improvement Manager, have started to meet with the heads of practice to understand what the individual service requirements are and explore how we can do things differently and more efficiently in the future. This includes considering what our statutory and legal obligations are and what functions are perhaps discretionary. Within this forum, our job is to challenge the heads of practice against existing work practices and link any future processes into future work or projects, including the new IT platform. As noted in today's report, we have seen a reduction in call volumes, and we would very much like to build on this to encourage residents to continue using our website. So to give members some context, the average cost of a face-to-face transaction is £8.62. For a telephone call, it's £2.83. And for a website transaction, 15p. So this is just one example of how the cost of delivering services will play a significant factor in our recovery. One service area to explore a different way of working could perhaps be the localities team, and I know a number of members have mentioned that today. And a number of members here today were previously involved in a working group to look at their roles and responsibilities. And I am aware there is a note from members today to revisit this work in light of our response. The localities team are instrumental in engaging with our local communities, and this is certainly an area for potential growth and development. During the communities group response, they have played a vital role in engaging with partners and towns and parish councils. So to facilitate the recovery work, we need to understand the role of the council and what our priorities are, and we will be looking to members to provide. Members and the needs of the community will play a vital part in this recovery, and I would ask that what you have heard from the other cells to be considered, as this will directly influence and feed into this piece of work. I'm opening up the board to members now for any questions or thoughts.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have any questions or comments? There are none at the moment. Councillor Thomas.
Councillor Pennington.
I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Pennington.
Thank you, Chairman. I completely endorse what Sarah's just said. I was the chairman of the Task and Finish on Localities, and I would very much welcome the opportunity to revisit that with the blessing of the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny, and of course the executive member. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pennington.
Yes, I'm particularly concerned with the contracts, and especially with fusion, because it appears that that has fallen by the wayside to some extent, and it must be revived as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pennington. Okay, if there are no other speakers, no, there aren't. So we'll move on to the recommendation. So at 2, 3, and 4, we've dealt with one earlier today. So the recommendation before us is 2, which is the request that officers develop a recovery and renewal plan in line with the framework and objectives outlined in Appendix 1. 2, take into account the conclusions of this meeting for the strategic framework for recovery and renewal. And finally, request that an update on progress against development of the plan be brought back to a joint meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel / DMC on the 3rd of September. So I'd like to move items 2, 3, and 4. Do I have a seconder?
Second, Chairman.
Right. I think that Councillor Mackay, you've got an amendment. Do you wish to proceed with that?
No, I think in the spirit of the this meeting and the sense of what has been said, it's being pedantic, and so I withdraw that amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 2, 3 and 4 before the meeting. Is there any member who wishes to oppose that or make an amendment? Could they please indicate? If we all agree, I'm not getting any indication that there's any member wishes to amend or oppose 2, 3 and 4. That being the case, Darryl, can we take that as carried by the meeting?
We can indeed, Chairman. I'm just looking as well. There's equally no one indicating they wish to speak on those parts of the recommendation either. So, and again, just give it a couple more seconds, but there's no one even indicating they're wishing to type against those 3 parts of recommendation. So I think, again, for the public record, we can assume that that is carried by unanimous vote.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes the meeting. And thank you, members, for all your participation and contribution. Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, just before you close, just explain all of the most of the items, etc., that we've discussed, and the items, agenda, etc., and our comments on those will go to the executive.
That's right.
I'm just thinking that there was proposal from council, or the idea from Councillor Rose, just trying to check that has been rolled up in all of this.
So what will happen is that all the proposals that came out of the discussion will be in an appendix that will form part of the report going to the executive. Can I also mention that what in fact will happen is that as the report progresses, or the plan progresses, it will be coming back to this joint meeting, the overview and scrutiny and DMC on the 3rd of September. So,
John, just one little question as well before we finish.
I think I don't really want to open the meeting. We've had the recommendation. I think it's all been explained where we're going. I don't really want to. I think we've concluded the meeting.
I think this is a valid point, though, just as a very, very quick one.
Okay.
Which is just that I'm aware that we had very little time for some of those later ones, and there may have been comments which people may have had that they didn't put in because we were rushing through. Is it possible for people to send comments to someone to insert into that appendix after this meeting if anyone had something that they wish to put in?
Darryl?
That's an interesting one, Chair, in the sense that the meeting itself has considered everything today. I mean, I think it would have to go in as an individual submission. I'd suggest it wouldn't necessarily go in as the appendix, which is the views of the joint meeting, Chair. But I mean, of course,
people could submit their things.
Exactly right. I mean, we're looking at an executive meeting in 2 weeks' time, so we're publishing the agenda next Wednesday, and of course, so there'll be a chance for members again to debate these issues again and bring new things into the mix. But I'd suggest, just for the purpose of the record today, I wouldn't want to complicate any new issues coming in today with what's been discussed today.
I agree. There will be an opportunity for members who are not on the executive to speak at the executive meeting, and so if there is any further point, then there will be an opportunity at that meeting, as well as the next meeting on the 3rd of September 2020. So there will be ample opportunity in the future for any item that's not been covered to be raised in the future.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Okay. Can we all say goodbye?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.